Welcome back to the Fulton County Gospel News podcast. My name is Barry Odell, and I am your host. Fulton County Gospel News is a bi-monthly publication of the Church of Christ in Mammoth Spring, Arkansas. If you'd like to learn more about our paper, visit our website, mammothspringchurchofchrist.com, and all of the information is available there. You can receive our paper in one of three formats. You can receive it in your email as a PDF. You can receive it through the United States Postal Service, or if you have a congregation that you would like to receive a bundle of the papers, you can receive it in that way too. All of it's free of charge. Visit our website and let us know what we can do for you, and we'll be happy to add you to one of those three mailing lists. So I want to talk about something that happened to me last night for the first time ever. So I'm 42 years old. I've lived in 4 different states. I was born and raised in Ohio until I was 16. I lived in Tennessee for about 10 years. I then moved to Florida and lived there for 7.5, and now I've been here in Northeast Arkansas for about 7.5 years. And for the first time ever, I experienced an earthquake last night here in Mammoth Spring, Arkansas. I was actually doing a online web conference with a class that I'm teaching with the Northwest Florida School of Biblical Studies. It was about 10 till 9 last night. And our church building is rather large. It's made out of rock. And I thought there was a big truck outside, a semi or a delivery truck or something had got turned around and was kind of idling in front of our building. But it got louder and louder, and the whole building started shaking. And like I said, I'd never experienced anything like that before. My wife and kids had already gone home. They knew that I was doing this web conference. Well, my wife called me and she said, the whole house is shaking. It kind of freaked her out. It freaked me out a little bit too, because, you've never been through something like that. And then here it is, and you don't exactly know what it is when it first happens. But anyway, that happened, like I said, about 10 till 9 last night. And the epicenter, according to what I could figure out, was about 12 miles northwest of Poplar Bluff, Missouri. I am 75 miles southwest of Poplar Bluff, Arkansas. It was a 4.0 magnitude, and it was 10 miles deep within the earth. And that's just, man, I don't know how to even wrap my head around that. But anyway, that's what it was. 75, well, it's actually, I guess technically about 87 miles away from Mammoth Spring, Arkansas. And it shook our house where my family was. It shook this big, strong church building where I was sitting. And it was quite something. I'm sure there are people who live in California, they deal with this kind of stuff every day. But for me, it was a brand new experience and a bit odd. So, you could imagine the reaction that some people had to that. I talked to somebody today, the day following the earthquake, and they were like, man, we better get ready. The Lord's coming back. That earthquake last night, man, that was just a warning. People better stop messing around and get ready for Jesus to come back. And that's a very common thought that people have when it comes to a natural disaster or a war or something like that goes on in the world. And they're religiously minded, and they want to please God, and they want to be ready for when Jesus does come. And so they witness something like that or experience something like that personally, and they come to the conclusion, well, it must be getting close to time. So I want to talk about that for just a few minutes today, and I'm going to read a passage to you where most people get this concept, and it comes from Matthew chapter 24, and I will start reading in verse 6. Jesus is answering a question that his disciples had about the destruction of Jerusalem and the overthrow of the temple. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And so, like I said, a lot of folks take that language, then they read the rest, or at least part of Matthew chapter 24, and they come to a conclusion that when something like that happens, his coming is imminent. All right, it's at hand. It's going to happen any moment, or at least sometime soon. It's not an uncommon thought that people have. So Jesus had prophesied of Jerusalem, the house of the Jewish people, the temple, being left unto them desolate. That goes back up in Matthew 23 and verse 38. Of course, Matthew 23 is where Jesus is in the temple and he's rebuking the scribes and Pharisees for their spiritual blindness and their hypocrisy and things like this. And as he and his disciples leave the temple, They are noticing the structure, and Jesus tells them, listen, there's coming a day when not one stone will be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's Matthew chapter 24 and verse 2. And so they ask questions. All right, well, how are we going to know? And so then what Jesus does, beginning in Matthew 24 and verse 4, is he answers their question, and he tells them there are going to be a lot of indicators, one of which he mentions there in Matthew 24 and verse 7 would be earthquakes in various places. Now those are his words for the impending destruction of Jerusalem. Now here's, and this is so easy to access. If you want to look at this information, so we know that Rome came in and destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70 under the leadership of Titus and the Roman armies. And we have historians who are writing during the first century, both Jewish and Roman. So for instance, one Roman historian that's pretty well known, and he was a critic of Christianity, is a man by the name of Tacitus. And in AD 51, he wrote about relentless earthquakes in Rome and that they were a common calamity in that day. Okay, so that's AD 51. And this is approximately, let's just say about 20 years after Jesus makes this prophecy to his disciples about the earthquakes in various places in regard to the destruction of Jerusalem. So that's a Roman historian. We also have a Jewish historian by the name of Josephus who wrote about earthquakes that were taking place in a variety of places in the first century. Acts chapter 16, when Paul and Silas are in a Philippian jail, you'll recall that the prison was shaken violently by an earthquake, Acts 16:26. So you have these historical references to earthquakes during the first century. You have the prophecy of Jesus that prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, there would be earthquakes in a variety of places. This is one of the indicators that Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem, was at hand. Now, as Jesus is talking about this in Matthew chapter 24, he keeps talking about that generation and those days and the things, the evidences that his disciples and others would be able to see when Jerusalem was about to be destroyed by the Romans. One of the most specific passages, and I'm going to turn over real quick to Luke chapter 21. So we have three accounts of this prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. Matthew's account is in Matthew 24, Mark's account is in Mark 13, and Luke's account is in Luke chapter 21. I want you to hear some of the things that Luke mentions here in Luke 21. So like in verse 10, he, like Matthew, records nation rising against nation. Then in Luke 21 verse 11, there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences, and there will be fearful signs and great signs from heaven. And so each of these three authors, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, talk about this, that earthquakes would be part of the preceding events that happen in connection with the destruction of Jerusalem. But now listen to Luke's specificity here. Luke 21, beginning in verse 20. We're going to leave the earthquake discussion for just a minute. Luke 21:20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Well, the it is Jerusalem. They're surrounded by their enemies. They're surrounded by the Romans. And so their desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now that's extremely important right there. Because again, people take Matthew 24 and they make it apply, or they try to make it apply to a final coming of Jesus and the rapture. Some people go as far as talking about a rapture and, the secret coming of Christ, and then he's going to come back and we're going to have the Battle of Armageddon. That's one particular view on this subject, what's called premillennialism. Now, another view of this subject of Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 is what's called preterism. Okay, preterism is from a Latin word that means past. And those folks who hold to that doctrine believe that AD 70 was the final coming of Christ, that he's not coming back in the future, that there is no future resurrection from the dead, and it's a pretty far out there doctrine. But both of those systems, both preterism and premillennialism, they love Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. But here in Luke chapter 21, we learn from verse 21 that this is a local judgment that's going to take place. Let those who are in Judea, well, Jerusalem is the capital, okay? Jerusalem's going to be surrounded by the armies. Well, what do? Flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. Don't come in the city when all these things happen. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Well, what days? Well, the days of the city of Jerusalem being surrounded by the Roman armies, by the days of the earthquakes and famines and pestilences, all these indicators that would let people know that Jerusalem's about to be destroyed. He says, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. In other words, it's going to be trampled until they're finished trampling it, until it's completely, the temple specifically, it's what's being talked about here, is completely destroyed. And so Luke is very specific in his description of what would happen to the city of Jerusalem at the hand of the Roman armies. Now, here's what we need to think about. So people today, when they feel an earthquake, or when they hear of wars, particularly in the Middle East, usually, when they hear of this stuff, a lot of folks' minds, again, I think sincere people who are familiar with Scripture, I won't say that they're scholarly in any way, but they've read and they know some things. They hear these things going on around the world, and they're like, man, it must be time. We need to get ready. Jesus must be coming back because he said there were going to be wars and earthquakes before he came. Well, that language in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 was language about a localized judgment against the city of Jerusalem. That's why they were told, don't come into the city if you're outside the city, and don't try to go into your house and get everything. Get out of town. That was the message that Jesus preached. Now, that Jewish historian that we mentioned earlier, Josephus, when he wrote about that, he talked about the fact that when these events took place and when Jerusalem was surrounded by armies, that the Christians at a certain point in time were able to escape. Rome's attention was kind of drawn away for a little while, for a certain space of months, because of something that happened essentially back home, and it's during that time that Christians got out of town. And no Christian died, according to sources, during the destruction of Jerusalem, because they knew what Jesus said. Now let's think about today just for a minute. We're still here, okay? Jesus has not come back yet. The Bible does tell us that when he comes, he's going to come with the clouds of heaven, and every eye shall see him. That's Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7. Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11 records the ascension of Christ, and his disciples witnessed that. And an angel told them, they said, well, the same Jesus whom you have seen depart, he will come in like manner as you saw him go. We know that Jesus is coming back. That's beyond question. But here's the thing. When he came in judgment against the city of Jerusalem, he didn't personally come. He didn't show up visibly and physically. God used the Roman armies to destroy Jerusalem. That was his source of punishment. It's kind of like in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapters 21 and 22, God said that his sword was going to come up against Jerusalem. Well, the sword is identified as Babylon. And so God used other people to punish his people for their sin. And that's what we see happening with the destruction of Jerusalem. I'm going to take my Bible to a couple of different passages. First of all, I'm going to go to 1 Thessalonians Chapter 5. As 1 Thessalonians Chapter 4 ends, Paul talks about the return of Christ and the resurrection from the dead and meeting the Lord in the air. And then he starts in chapter 5 by writing this. But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves know perfectly. Now listen, you have a full knowledge of this fact, that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then suddenly destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Now think about that. Remember back in Luke chapter 21 we read, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, get out of town, escape, okay, get away. Well, now here in 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul says that this is going to come as pains, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. These are two different occurrences. And one had signs, pestilences, famines, earthquakes, wars, etc. This one here is as a thief in the night. So here we go, 1 Thessalonians 5, now here's verse 4. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. In other words, you know how it's going to go down. It's going to come as a thief in the night, but that's not going to surprise you because we've told you that's how it's going to come. It's going to come unexpectedly. In fact, and I love this connection here, in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 3, Paul again writing, or same context here, he says, for when they say peace and safety, he says, then sudden destruction. Now I want to connect that, sudden destruction. I'm turning back to Luke chapter 21, because Luke uses the exact same word. Listen to this, Luke 21:34. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come upon you unexpectedly. Okay, Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5 says, suddenly, like labor upon a woman, and Jesus in Luke 21 says, unexpectedly. Now, the destruction of Jerusalem was not unexpected, because you have, again, famines, wars, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. You're going to have the Roman army surrounding Jerusalem. It's not unexpected. It's not sudden. But there's another day of which Jesus says it's coming unexpectedly. And Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 4 says, not only is it a thief in the night, but it's going to happen suddenly. It's the same word in the Greek language as is unexpectedly in Luke 21 and verse 34. Now, another passage I want to look at real quick, and then we'll just kind of wrap this up, is 2 Peter chapter 3, and I'll just start reading in verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. Okay, folks, how does that work? So again, last night I experienced my first ever earthquake, and it was quite something, okay? It came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it. Nobody came by and said, hey, we're getting ready to have an earthquake, so I just wanted to give you a word of warning and let you know. There were signs that would indicate the destruction of Jerusalem. So here's a question. How does a thief in the night break into your house? Does he come by and, hey, he's going to leave a note on your car? Listen, I'll be by about 2 a.m. and I'm going to break into your house and I'm going to rob you. Does he come by and ring the doorbell and give you a few minutes to get ready? Of course not. He comes as a thief in the night, unexpectedly. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 4. Suddenly, Luke chapter 21 and verse 34. I don't know, to me, the distinction between what happened in AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed and all of the pre-destruction indicators, and then the unexpected and sudden and thief-in-the-night appearing of Christ when, as we're told here in 2 Peter chapter 3, the heavens will pass away with a great noise and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Well, in AD 70, the earth and the works that are therein were not burned up. The heavens didn't pass away with a great noise. Now, Jerusalem, you might say, passed away with a great noise. There's no question about that. And the temple was destroyed. But that came with signs. That came with indicators. Listen, there's another day coming for which there are no indicators. Jesus tells us I said I was going to finish with 2 Peter 3, but I guess I lied to you. I'm going to go back real quick to Matthew chapter 24, since that's where we started. So Jesus talks about this day, or these days rather, that are full of precursors. Again, famine, pestilence, wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes in a variety of places, the surrounding of the city of Jerusalem by the Roman armies. But then you get down to Matthew 24 and verse 36, and Jesus says, but of that day, listen, I mean, this is so clear. You can know when Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. You will see it, and you will be able to get out of town. Now, Matthew 24:36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. If there are signs and indicators, if there are earthquakes and wars and famines that are going to precede the second coming of Christ, then Matthew 24:36 means nothing at all. Because of that day and that hour, no one knows. It's coming suddenly. It's coming unexpectedly. All right, no indicators, no precursors. So I don't really have any more to say about that. Jesus' words are not hard to understand. Peter is very clear on the day of the Lord coming as a thief in the night. Paul is very clear on the day of the Lord coming as a thief in the night, and we know how they operate, how thieves operate. They certainly don't operate with warnings and signs before they break into your house and steal your stuff. So I thought I'd just take a few minutes today and share these thoughts with you. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and benefited from it. And if you haven't yet done so, I would ask you please to go to podbean.com and subscribe to our channel, Fulton County Gospel News, and you'll get a notification every time a new episode comes out. You can also interact with each individual episode on the Podbean channel. Again, if you're interested in the paper, visit our website, MammothSpringChurchOfChrist.com, and all of our pertinent information is there. We'll do whatever we can to help you out there. I appreciate you tuning in today, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Fulton County Gospel News Podcast.